This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. The rumor mill has been on fire about Brandon Aiyuk being traded somewhere, right? Whether it's going to be Pittsburgh, Washington, New England, or he just works out a new deal with San Francisco, or hell, maybe he even gets traded to Cleveland. Whether that happens, I have no clue. I'm not here to talk about, is a Brandon Aiyuk trade realistic? I'm here to ask a question that involves Brandon Aiyuk, but is really much bigger than just Brandon Aiyuk. And that question is, are $35 million wide receivers worth it? It seems like an obvious question to ask, but seriously, how many people, especially nationally, have really evaluated that question? Is a wide receiver in the structure of the NFL salary cap, knowing it goes up, ever gonna really be worth that $35 million? And how much of the cap is $35 million? Well, I did the math, and it's about 13.7% of today's salary cap of $255.4 million. If it's $30 million, it's 11.7%, but the $35 million number we're talking about is 13.7% of the entire salary cap for one wide receiver. It's interesting. It's a real interesting number. We can apply this to the Browns, but honestly, 13.7% is high for any team, especially a team that has already paid Jerry Jeudy, that is currently paying Deshaun Watson, and that will likely have to pay David Njoku. So if we're talking about adding in that money and talking about how much just two wide receivers, one tight end, and a quarterback would cost the Cleveland Browns if they spent $35 million on any wide receiver, we're talking about what? $17 million a year for Jerry Jeudy in cash. We're talking about $45 million a year in cash for Deshaun Watson. We're talking about probably $17 million for David Njoku once he gets a new deal, which he should be up for this offseason. And what? $35 million for whatever wide receiver that's out there that you want to pay $35 million for. And we're talking about a number that is so gigantic for a quarterback, two wide receivers, and a tight end. That's it. That would be 44.6% of the salary cap for four offensive players that are half of the game because they play on offense and half of the offense because they're the pass game. They're not involved in the run game. So for 25% of the team, you would be paying 44.6% of your entire salary cap for a quarter of the effectiveness. It's an interesting question, right? Because at least with a quarterback, when they make that much money, they're involved in every pass play. Every pass play has something to do with the quarterback, and the quarterback has a lot to do with the run game nowadays with how mobile quarterbacks are, and a quarterback has a lot to do with the run games when it comes to checking to certain protections or switching up certain schemes or checking out of runs whenever you do. So a quarterback making a bunch of money, we've justified that already. It makes sense for a quarterback to make a disproportionate percentage of the salary cap because the quarterback has responsibilities over the run game. They have responsibilities over the ball control. They have responsibilities over the pass game. They have responsibilities over the entire offense. A wide receiver has a responsibility of one route on a play or like one block on a run play. That is a significant difference in responsibility But the number, right? Deshaun Watson would be at $46 million. If you paid a wide receiver 35, that would be like a $11 million difference for like responsibility gap that's like this wide. It just doesn't make much sense to me. And I don't know why it feels like I'm the only one who looks at $35 million for a wide receiver. And look, I'm not in a, we're paying these athletes too much money back. I don't care about any of that. I wish the NFL was uncapped so you could just pay these dudes whatever and we never had to talk about it. Like, that's my honest to God stance on this. I don't care that players are getting paid a ton of money to play a sport that makes a ton of money. In principle, that's not the issue. But when you put this in a salary cap, now I have to talk about how this affects things and how the position might not make sense to be this big of a part of the cap. And since we do live in a capped world, and this is a salary cap sport, I have to talk about it. It just doesn't make sense, man. $35 million for a wide receiver. Now, with that number that I brought up, right, where if you just have David Njoku, Deshaun Watson, Jerry Jeudy, and a new wide receiver at $35 million a year, that would be 44.6% of this year's cap. And the cap goes up by 8% annually. So each year, that number 44.6 will go down by like 3.3% if you do the math on it. So over 4 years, the average for that group of players, right? Those 4 players over like a 4-year time period, the average percentage of cap they would hit would be about 40% of the cap. So it's a little bit lower than 44.6, but it's still a lot because, again, the passing offense is maybe 30% of what the team brings to the table, right? There's another 20% that is the run game. There's like 5% to special teams, and then the rest is defense. So even if you justify it by saying you're going to throw the ball more, it still doesn't make sense for 4 players in the passing game who are exclusively really used in the passing game to take up 44% of the cap. It just doesn't make much sense. I'll get to why I think this matters when it comes to winning a Super Bowl in a little bit. But if we just look at the numbers, it doesn't make a ton of sense to allocate your resources like this. I'm not against spending the money. I'm not against giving somebody the bag. But if you do give somebody the bag, you got to make sure it's done in a way that makes sense when it comes to roster construction, or else you're going to end up with a very expensive piece that isn't taking you to your goal. And that's a very bad problem. It's part of the issue that people have with Deshaun Watson right now. It's not that he makes the most money in the NFL, it's that he's paid $46 million to be the franchise quarterback. And we still don't know if that's going to be what he's going to be. We'll find out this year, and I think there's a good chance that he plays well, and we don't care about the $46 million after that. But for right now, we have questions. The same can be true for a wide receiver making $35 million, because you can say that wide receiver's good, he's going to get 1,000 yards, all of that. Is that worth $35 a year? That number that I just mentioned, right? 44.6% of the salary cap. That does not include the offensive line, which is a part of the passing game and the run game. That doesn't include the running back, Nick Chubb, which is a part of the run game and the pass game. And it begs an even bigger question. Why are we so tight about giving money to tight ends, running backs, and offensive linemen, when tight ends, running backs, and offensive linemen are actually included in everything that you do offensively, right? If you have a 3-down back, that's a running back that pass protects, runs the ball, and runs routes. That's 3 phases of the offense. It's the entire thing. Offensive linemen play in every phase of the offense, right? Run block, pass block, they do it both. Tight ends, run block, pass block, they do it both, especially you're getting paid a lot of money. But like wide receivers have somehow found a way to make twice what an offensive lineman or offensive guard makes, twice what a top running back makes, twice of what a top tight end makes, despite being useful in half the situations that those guys are useful in. Seriously. Like a wide receiver run blocking is a joke. It's not like something that you're going to create your entire offense around, but you can create an offense around a great run blocking tight end, especially if that dude can run routes. Again, I feel like we need to audit this. This seems like a bubble to me, this whole wide receiver thing. And it seems like a bubble that's ready to burst because it's a lot of people throwing a lot of money into wide receivers because everybody else is doing it. And that seems like the hot trend without asking a single serious question of why you're even doing it in the first place. Think about that. The Browns, as of right now, have about 34.4% of their salary cap dedicated to the offensive line and running backs. And again, those are players that are going to be useful in both phases of the offense, pass and run. Both phases of the offense. 34.4% of the cap. But we really, really want the Browns to spend 44.6, 10 more percentage points on the cap to add another wide receiver to a team that's not even needy at the position. And that doesn't even include an actual evaluation of if Brandon Ayuk's production is worth $35 million or even $30 million or $28 million. This isn't even about your evaluation of Brandon Ayuk. You can think Brandon Ayuk is one of the greatest wide receivers in the NFL right now. It still would not make sense at $35 million. It would make us feel good. It would get us excited. It would be great for viewership on my channel. But if we're really being honest here, it doesn't make much sense. I hear somebody else, well, no, Quincy, if they got a $35 million wide receiver, they're going to cut some money, right? So, you know, we're going to still keep Nick Chubb, but we're going to get rid of Wyatt Teller, throw that money out. We're going to get rid of Jack Conklin, and that should make up the difference. It doesn't, because what Jack Conklin and Wyatt Teller have is dead money. So if you cut that money out, yeah, you save a little bit of money from cutting those players, but you still have dead money on your books, which means that you end up going from what? 34% of the cap, 34.4% of the cap would take up the offensive line and run backs to 32. Now, if you're thinking you're going to run this offense out there with still some expensive pieces on the offensive line, still Nick Chubb, and then a $35 million wide receiver on top of the offense that you're already paying and keeping David Njoku, you're talking about spending 74.5% of the cap on just the offense for a team that success is centered around the defense. So no, I don't think it makes sense for the Cleveland Browns, but I promise you, if you did this math for a lot of other teams, it really wouldn't make sense for them either. And this is especially for teams that are really trying to win a championship. Let me put it like this. I don't think signing a $35 million wide receiver is a move that greatly increases or decreases your chance to win a championship. You can sign a $35 million wide receiver, but if you were a championship team before that wide receiver, you'll be a championship team after. And if you weren't a championship team before that wide receiver, trading for that wide receiver ain't going to change you into a championship team. It's just not. Like, Tyreek Hill has balled out as much as anybody could ball out in the last 2 years. Are the Miami Dolphins serious? No, they're not. They're a good team. They're great. They're fun in the regular season, but we don't take them seriously in the playoffs. What about trading for Devontae Adams, right? That really changed the fortunes of the Raiders. They have gotten great offensive play out of them since they made that move, right? No, it hasn't happened. This brings me to the point about winning and why I just don't think that this is a great winning strategy. Again, you could win with a $35 million wide receiver. If you had a team that's good enough to win a championship and you do nothing but add a $35 million wide receiver, that dude's not going to make it so you can't win it. So I'm not saying it's impossible to win a Super Bowl with a very expensive wide receiver. I'm saying if your plan is we are going to become a Super Bowl championship caliber team because we traded for a $35 million wide receiver, then that's a bad idea. Right. I think the Browns are at that point now. If they went and got Brandon Ayuk and swapped them out for Amari Cooper, they'd still have that same chance to be a Super Bowl contender. But if the Browns felt like they needed to add Brandon Ayuk to upgrade from Amari Cooper to become a Super Bowl contender, I would be very worried about that working, because that does not sound like a winning strategy. I want to be very clear on where I stand with this, because this is going to be perceived as a hot take and people are going to try to take it and twist it and turn it whatever way they want to. I want to be very clear on what I'm saying. I don't think a $35 million wide receiver takes you or elevates you to becoming a championship team if you weren't before you had that $35 million wide receiver. The reason I think this doesn't really add anything to it, despite that player being really good, is that paying a wide receiver $35 million tips the scales in a way that make no sense for roster construction. It's way too much money for way too little impact. Let's look at I'll bring up the best example you can have for a $35 million wide receiver. Justin Jefferson in 2022. Now, he wasn't getting paid $35 million when he was playing in 2022, but this is the season that got him a $35 million contract. And in this season, you can justify him taking up 13% of the cap by saying these numbers, right? He took up 13.7% of the cap. That's what Justin Jefferson takes up now. But he's 29.4% of the offense when it comes to total yards. He's 16.6% of the touchdowns when it comes to total touchdowns. He's 21.4% of the first downs when it comes to all the first downs that the Minnesota Vikings had that year. And he's 16.7% of all the total plays on offense are targeted towards Justin Jefferson. So if you look at those numbers in that specific way, it does make sense to spend that much money on Justin Jefferson. I bet Justin Jefferson's agent presented these numbers to the Minnesota Vikings to make them feel like, yeah, 13.7% of the cap for Justin Jefferson, that makes sense. But it requires you to forget that the offense is only half of the game. The passing part of the offense is half of the game. We're talking about 25% of the game, in which Justin Jefferson is one part out of maybe 4 wide receivers that could be on the field, or 3 wide receivers and a tight end. So let's have a fun math game here. At the end of the day, we're talking about giving 13.7% of the salary cap to somebody who plays 50% of the game because he's an offensive player. And then within that offense, he plays about 25 to 30% of that game because he's a wide receiver. He's only really involved in the passing game. And within that 25 to 30% that he plays, he's about 25 to 30% of the people on the field at that time. So we're talking about paying 13.7% to somebody who's 25% of a 25% of the offense. Does that make sense to you? But seriously, if we're talking about him taking up 13.7% of the total salary cap, that means he needs to be at least 27% of the offense. And you can argue in 2022 that Justin Jefferson was responsible for 27.4% of the success of the Vikings offense. You can really make that argument, and it's a good argument to make. But do you think Justin Jefferson's ever going to replicate the numbers that he had in 2022 again? You think he's going to have 1,800 yards anytime soon, or is that going to be a career outlier for him? It's more likely that this is a career outlier for him, and you get significantly less than that out of Justin Jefferson for the rest of his career, because those numbers aren't justifiable. The 13.7%, the being a part of 27.4% of the offense, aren't justifiable if he's getting 1,300 yards a year. They're really only justifiable if he's getting 1,700 to 1,800 yards a year in a double-digit touchdown guy that year. That's the only time where those numbers are really justifiable. And he's not going to do that. And that's one of the best examples you can use. That is when somebody actually achieves the ridiculous yardage and production at wide receiver to be able to justify being that big of a part of the offense. And even then, were the Minnesota Vikings a serious threat to win the Super Bowl in 2022? You can say it's not because of anything. It wasn't Justin Jefferson's fault, which is true. It was because the team wasn't that good around him. But again, when you're spending $35 million on a wide receiver, it seriously hampers your ability to put a team around him. You got to pay a quarterback. So now we talk about quarterback, wide receiver. Well, that's going to be in a ballpark of $45 to $55 million. You're adding that. We talking about $90 million for one wide receiver and one quarterback. And then you got to build the rest of the team with that. You think you're going to build a great team with that? I don't think so. That doesn't make much sense to me. Which brings me to my second point. Are we sure paying a wide receiver $35 million is the best use of $35 million to improve a team? Like, think about it like this. You can get David Njoku and Nick Chubb right now for less than $30 million, right? You can sign David Njoku to a, what, $15-16 million contract like he is now. Hell, you give him a raise, give him $18 million. You give Nick Chubb $12 million. You can get him right now. Market value, $30 million. Or you can get one Brandon Ayuk. I would rather have David Njoku and Nick Chubb. Or you could flip out David Njoku and Nick Chubb for two 800-yard wide receivers for $14 million or whatever it is. My point is, you can make up the production that you would get from a $35 million wide receiver easy. Like, think about this. We know Nick Chubb is capable. He had in 2022, 1,764 total yards, 13 touchdowns, 81 first downs. If he plays wide receiver at that level of production, that's worth $35 million. Since he's a running back with that level of production, it's worth 12. It's wild, right? But that's just Nick Chubb. You can still get you a David Njoku in that same cart. And we know David Njoku is capable of 882 yards and 6 touchdowns and 35 first downs. Didn't even play all the games, but that's what he's capable of. That's 2,646 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 116 first downs for less than $30 million. Or you can hope Brandon Ayuk gets 1,500 yards and 8 touchdowns. It just doesn't seem like a good use of $35 million. Like, what wide receiver is getting 2,600 yards? What wide receiver is getting 19 touchdowns and 2,600 yards? This is going to be a hot take, and this is not going to be a popular take. I imagine everybody's going to have their rebuttals for this, but I'm just going to come out here early and say this. Paying wide receivers $35 million makes no sense. I don't know why we're acting like it does. I don't know why we're acting like this is normal. It's not normal. $35 million for a wide receiver. I can't dice it up in a way that makes any sense when it comes to any kind of principles of roster construction. And the reason this matters, the reason this isn't just a hypothetical argument on Twitter to win every week when your guy gets more fantasy points than the other guy, the reason this is about Super Bowls and winning it all is this. Offenses don't win championships. And despite what you may have heard, defenses alone don't win championships either. See, those sayings have got us to lose the plot on this entire conversation of what wins championships. And what wins championships is balanced football teams. It's not sexy, right? There's no good saying for, hey, a well-balanced football team wins championships. You sound corny. It sounds terrible. It's not a fun saying. Nobody wants to do it, but that's the truth. You look at the New England Patriots. Yeah, they had good defenses. Yeah, they had good offenses, but they were never overwhelming in either category when they won the Super Bowl. They were just pretty damn good defensively, pretty damn good offensively. Some years are better offensively than they are defensively. But what the Patriots always were when they won Super Bowls, at least, were balanced. Hell, the one year they didn't win the Super Bowl, what everybody thought they would, was the year they were kind of overpowered on offense, but not as powered on defense in 2007. And then who beat them? A balanced New York Giants team. The reason balance matters when it comes to winning championships is because what is required to win a championship is that you win 4 or 3 games in a row versus the NFL's best competition. That means that you have to have a lot of different ways to win a football game. It's not going to be the same way every time. Yes, sometimes you're going to be able to air it out and throw the ball and win that way, but other times you might have to run the ball to win the game. You might have to just play a defensive game. And the teams that are well allocated with their cap to be well balanced across their cap are going to be the teams that are going to be able to go the furthest because those teams are balanced. When you spend $35 million on a wide receivers, you tip the scales of that balance. It's done with. You're going to have to rely on throwing the ball way more than anything else. You're going to have to rely on that winning you a game. And what we know about the playoffs is eventually you're going to run into a situation where throwing the ball is not going to get it done. You need to be able to run it. You need to be able to play some defense. You need to be able to have a good special teams game. That's what's going to win you a championship. And when you spend too much money trying to make the Pirates game look great and sacrifices the run game and sacrifices special teams and sacrifices the overall budget for everything else, you make yourself unbalanced, and unbalanced teams look great in the regular season, but they usually flop in the postseason. Because when you spend that much money on a wide receiver, you're locked in. There's no margin of error. It's not impossible to win like that, but it's very difficult because it requires that you get even luckier than what you already have to get to a Super Bowl. That's why I don't think it makes sense. It's not that wide receivers don't deserve to get paid. It's not that wide receivers aren't valuable to an offense. It's not that. It's that when you start to spend that much money, we're talking about $35 million wide receiver being normal on top of a $50 million quarterback being normal. Once you're spending that much money on just two players who are a part of just passing the football, you throw your entire roster out of balance. You can pay a quarterback a bunch of money, and you can pay wide receivers some money, but you can't pay your quarterback a bunch of money and then pay a bunch of wide receivers a bunch of money and then complain when your team's not balanced, when your team's not some team that can be taken seriously, because when it comes to the postseason, you're too easy to beat because you're one-dimensional. That's my whole point. It's not an evaluation of Brandon Ayuk or any wide receiver making $35 million. This is an evaluation of, in the structure of the salary cap, does it make sense? Again, if this was an uncapped sport, I wouldn't be making this video. I wouldn't care, right? Who makes what, I don't care. But when it comes to the cap, and that being something that you have to work in, and there's a lot of ways to work around it. You can move money around, you can spend some cash early, but eventually the bill does come due on various different levels. You could kick it down the road and you can make that bill much less. But if you spend $35 million on a wide receiver, while you're spending $45 million for a quarterback, like, there's going to be some consequences to that are going to be inevitable because it's too much money to hide down the road. I'm not saying the Browns shouldn't do this or the Browns should, or whatever evaluation you think I'm trying to make here. What I am saying is we really ought to have a better conversation and a more thorough conversation about, should wide receivers, or are wide receivers actually worth the $35 million that you're paying them when it comes to the structure of the salary cap? I don't think it makes sense. If we're going to sit here and get mad every time a running back makes $14 million, and I think here's another thing that bugs me about this that does happen, because we want wide receivers to get the bag, we don't think about who that comes in sacrifice of, because it is a salary cap sport. So yeah, when you pay Justin Jefferson $35 million, you know who ends up getting the shaft? Running backs. Because in order to justify giving Justin Jefferson $35 million, NFL teams have to go to the whole running back position and say, hey, we can only pay the best of your 10. When in reality, Justin Jefferson's probably worth $25 million, and so is somebody like Nick Chubb or Derrick Henry or whatever top running back you want to throw in. That's another thing I don't think enough people consider, is how much we're hyping up wide receivers to justify not paying running backs when they're both impactful to the game, or even tight ends. But that's my 2 cents. I don't think it makes very much sense to spend $35 million on a wide receiver for the reasons that I stated in this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.